3. Go. No. Make 3.
You are listening to the new WPVM LP in Asheville, North Carolina, 103.7 on your dial, streaming globally at WPVMFM.org. And today you are listening to Blaine's World. And if you expected to have a Blaine Greenfield on the air, as he almost always is, the surprise is you have me, Mark Lieberman, the host of another radio show. But I'm subbing for Blaine, who's under the weather today. We wish that he gets over whatever he has quickly and returns to the air next week. But I am happy to be in the studio with one gentleman who's sitting across from me, Blaine Kerr. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
You can just say Blaine. That's fine.
Just say Blaine.
Yep.
Okay, it's a guy named Blaine, but his last name is actually Kerr. And he is the host, creator, and producer for something called Appalachian, and I don't know if I said that right. Give me a chance. Appalachian Pie Productions, and in particular, Appalachian Pie Podcast. Blaine, thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for being here as well. And if you don't mind, let's stick with the Appalachian production.
Appalachian. Okay. Yep. All right. So I was corrected on that. But of course, I forgot, and I pointed out that I didn't really use that term very often since I left Ohio, and we talked about the Appalachian Mountains. But in any event, in all seriousness, maybe that's a good place to start, because I think our listeners would be very interested in knowing who you are, why you are, what you're doing, and why things around Appalachia are important to you.
Okay, well, it's pretty simple. All in all, I got tired growing up. I'm a native of the region from just over on the other side of the mountains in Tennessee. And it's always driven me crazy, not only the mispronunciation, as you were illustrating before, but that's just kind of a funny thing to me. What really gets to me is the stereotype that mass media has portrayed of Appalachia in general. So I decided when I started the podcast that I would try to incorporate some way to change that stereotype just by highlighting the people, the culture, anything about the region that I thought really painted a different picture.
So let me start out first asking you a question. What do you consider to be Appalachia? What region are we talking about? I mean, we've got the Appalachian, I'll say it, mountains, which run down the East Coast. We have the Appalachian Trail. I'm having a hard time saying that. and then we have, I guess when people talk about Appalachia, when some people, I won't indulge in stereotypes. When some people talk about it, they think, well, number one, it's southern, which wouldn't necessarily be true, actually, if you view
right.
the South as beginning at the Mason-Dixon line or the old Confederacy or whatever. But what is Appalachia, geography-wise?
Well, of course, you can only say that the border of Georgia and South Carolina all the way up to Maine, which is basically what the trail runs anyhow. And I agree with that. I'm just not as familiar with the northern Appalachia area. I guess I'm more familiar in all with southern and central. So say from Pennsylvania downwards.
So in effect then, just to be clear, when you're talking about cultural stereotypes, the good, bad, and the ugly, you're really confining your focus of interest in particular to the southern region. And which is to say, in effect, there may be many differences between people who live on the Appalachian Trail, let's say, going all the way up to Maine, from somebody who lives in South Carolina. So it's not just defined by the mountains themselves.
No, but that's just what I'm using as a frame of reference when I refer to Appalachia.
Okay. So why don't you tell us what it is that you specifically do to acquaint people, I guess, who may not know, as well as people who do know and are interested in the culture. Again, when I think of the term Appalachian, which I usually think of it as Appalachian. I'm going to stop that in a second. I think, okay, there's music, there's crafts, there's art, but then I also think moonshine, and I think of people that have a more relaxed style of living, and we talked about this a bit before we went on air. Unfortunately, I did watch the Beverly Hillbillies. I was going to say Hill Brothers, the Beverly Hillbillies, but I have not watched more recent things that presumably describe the area, like, forgive me, Duck Dynasty. Is that part of that? Is that you're cringing?
Yeah.
So why don't you tell us what it is that you concentrate your efforts on, and how you promote, I guess, a positive view?
Well, primarily, I do rely heavily on the arts and artists of the region, which quite frequently most of them are dabbling in multiple types of media. For example, I've had people on from the Gatlinburg area that are sculptors, paint in various different media as well, also as traveling musicians. I've also had bands on that are from the West Virginia area that also do things such as belly dancing and all at festivals. I've had a gentleman on who does recreations and performs as Abraham Lincoln all around the country. Here locally, I've spoken with attorneys, I've spoken with people that have started up nonprofit organizations, little things like that just kind of stand out and I think make the community stronger.
So, in terms of what you do and the sort of things that you're promoting, I'm assuming that there's two sides of this. There are the folks that identify themselves as being part of the Appalachian culture and have very strong roots, shall we say, and self-identify in that way.
Right.
And then there's people who are largely ignorant of what the sort of the cultural history is, or indulge in negative stereotypes.
Right.
But let's talk about the first part of it. Are you finding people easily in terms of your travels, essentially, who say, "Yeah, you're doing a good thing," trying to describe this culture which is either unknown or criticized or part of the butt of jokes and so on and so forth. Is that what you're finding?
Yes, actually, and pardon the shameless plug here, but if anyone were to take the time to look up Appalachian Pie, that's P-I, not P-I-E, on Facebook, you can scroll through the review sections. I've had several reviews from steady listeners, some people that I grew up with and other people that I've met purely online up until the point of having an interview.
Okay. And the people, you say you've talked to like attorneys and so on and so forth, but I'm guessing that the focus of the people that you are bringing together or dealing with in terms of getting their story out are, again, more in the sort of the artistic venue. They paint, they do crafts, they do acting, they do singing, they do music, but that may be too narrow view of what you're bringing into the picture.
Actually, yes. Just for example, since we brought up the attorney again, when I initially approached him, I was wanting to talk to him about kind of a silly concept that I had, just horrible laws that existed in our area. Well, we got into a conversation within about 5 minutes. We totally dropped that, just pivoted basically. And we got into a couple of different stories that he had dealt with some drug abuse deaths, and where the family had pretty much given him the okay to go out in the community, tell their story to try to help change not only the approach for treatment, but some of the things to deal down the road, hopefully, I would imagine, with the legal process.
So if you're comfortable talking about it, I take it that what you're talking about is primarily opioid addictions, because that's what we hear.
That was
hear
pretty
about.
much the focus, yes.
And I guess what you're also, and I'm asking you to speak about, is obviously the so-called opioid epidemic, which we're hearing about more and more often, and a lot of claims about who's responsible, and the pharmaceutical companies and doctors writing prescriptions, the black market, and then all the way to opioids supposedly coming in from Mexico, true or not true. But I think, do you feel, based upon your travels again, that there are unique issues associated with addiction issues for people who live in the area that you're defining as Appalachia? Tough question.
No, I'm trying not to get on a high horse about this, just because I have a problem with pharmaceuticals in general.
Well, let's talk about how it affects the community. And you can, again, as long as we don't libel anybody.
I wouldn't even consider that.
So just talk about that.
No, I do find that there is an overuse, obviously, of lots of painkillers. We've heard these stories all over the place, even as far as other big-time names in the media. And to me, I don't necessarily think it is localized in just one place like Appalachia. It's all over the U.S. So, no. Now, what's available to be used? Probably when you're thinking about opioids like OxyContin or something like that, yes, it seems to be heavily prescribed in this area.
Okay. So I want, again, to give you the space here to talk about the positive things that you're doing, and again, primarily in terms of your podcasts and the arts and so on and so forth. But if you could spend just a couple of minutes talking about what I would guess are some of the unique social and political issues facing people who either still live in the area that you define as Appalachia, or who are, who come to areas like Asheville, which I take it, tell me if I'm wrong, we're too far west to be considered part of Appalachia. Is that a correct statement, or am I?
No, I would say pretty much until you get on the leeward side of McDowell County and everything.
Leeward, that's a term I don't use very often. Does that mean right, left, north, or south?
Down them mountains.
Down them mountains. So this would be part of that area?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So tell us what your sense is, again, about problems that are not necessarily unique, but are magnified or exacerbated because of the negative stereotypes that people have for people who are, quote, from Appalachia.
Okay, I'll give you one of the better examples. I actually spoke to a lady who works within the government of a neighboring state. She had released a book, and I found it very interesting because she also keeps up a blog dealing with her memories and kind of the same thing with the stereotype and feeling it's inaccurate for Appalachians. And she was telling me the story when we were talking about just after she had moved from her hometown, which was a small town, and had gone away to college, she had a hard time with friends because people were making fun of just the way she spoke. And she said it even affected her later on in life when she started going to job interviews. People would just look down on her and think she was stupid because of her speech pattern.
Interesting. Okay. So let's get into, again, what the content is of what you do and who you reach through the podcast. I'm assuming that you do some live speaking, and you probably put together groups of people who are part of this culture that you're talking about promoting and want to promote in a positive way. What's new and exciting, or what have you been doing for the last few years as you've been promoting this coming out, so to speak?
Well, it's given me not only just the opportunity to connect with people and get their stories out, as you mentioned earlier, but it's also kind of opened up other doors. I've gotten into some of the local storytelling here. A little bit of voice acting has come out of it, but and as far as what the podcast is really there for, it's partially to entertain, but it's also partially to educate. I just want people to stop and take another look at Appalachia rather than necessarily taking my view of it or taking the stereotypical view of it.
For my listeners who are just tuning in, we're talking with Blaine Kerr, and I'm going to say your last name, a.k.a. Blaine, who is the creator and producer of Appalachian Pie Productions and Appalachian Pie Podcasts. And, you're listening on WPVM LP in Asheville, 103.7 on your dial, streaming globally at WPVMFM.org. Can you give us a sort of a shortened presentation of the sorts of things that you are trying to get out? In other words, what would you typically say in 2 or 3 minutes about the very issues we've been talking about?
Well, more than anything, I want to help change the light of how Appalachia is seen. I want it to have more of a positive spin, whereas I feel like most of the time it is portrayed in a negative manner. So when I'm looking for people to speak with and to have these conversations, I try to find people who either have a slightly different view or at least are really interested in helping out in the community. So when I'm able to find those people, get to have a conversation, we get to see how things naturally flow. There's always a question as to whether or not they've ever felt like the stereotype negatively affected them as they were growing up or whenever they meet new people, especially the bands going out touring. There's a band out of the Knoxville area that really, 2 of the ladies are from just outside of Asheville, actually. And they were telling me the story about how the fact that lots of times they kind of play up the hillbilly thing a little bit as part of the entertainment side. But they also have run into problems even with just trying to get into venues because people think they're kind of dumb and hick sounding. So if I can get people to stop for just a second and take another look at it and quit being so quick to judge, that's probably my primary goal.
So what are some of the positive attributes of people that identify or who you would identify as Appalachian, have an Appalachian culture, Appalachian history? What are just spin-off, what are the good things that you would like people to appreciate about it, and what do folks from that area feel good about, despite the fact that they have to reckon with people who don't understand and people who are part of the negative stereotype culture or maybe just have never experienced? What are the good things?
Well, I can't necessarily pinpoint for each individual person as to what they see as the good things. For me, I guess what I've observed is not only the sense of community that seems a little bit more tightly woven, but I would even go so far as to say that a lot of the people who are from Appalachia grew up here, even if they were transplanted, anything like that, they've got a certain pride for the area, even though it's got the stereotype associated with it, because to me, it's the building of that community and the support within the community, which makes Appalachia a little bit different from other places I've lived. So
the experience of growing up in that area, you feel, despite again, we keep going back to the negative stereotypes, and I'm trying to focus on the positive. You believe, and you can't speak for everyone, obviously,
right,
that being from that area instilled certain positive qualities. And I'm guessing, because I'm going to guess, that we're saying, well, just for one thing, just living in that area, not having access to a lot of the social amenities that people that live in urban centers have, that in and of itself helps to inspire people to develop strong character, self-reliance, relationships with family, relationships with church, and so on and so forth.
And even cooperation just with one another in the community, be it in school, heck, down here in Asheville, even somebody helping out with directions. I know I've lived in a couple of northern cities, and it's kind of hard to get people to speak back to you or even make eye contact or say hi. And I find that to be something. But I also find, too, if you're in Appalachia, people will take you in kind of as their own best friend or family member if you're hurting and you've been a good person, and they recognize that. And I just never experienced that living anywhere else.
So do you believe that Asheville itself, and not just Asheville, the city, but Buncombe County and the area that we're living in, do you feel as if we are more accepting as a community, and again, it's a generalization. I recognize that because you have a lot of folks that live in Asheville that come from up north or further down south. Because if you go too far down south, you're already north. If you go to South Florida, you're north again. So,
very true.
So my question to you is, what do you feel about the general level of acceptance? Because as I go around there and listen to certain music venues, there's a lot of, and again, I don't want to indulge in stereotypes, but banjo picking.
Hey, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Okay.
Hillbilly is not a pejorative term.
Okay. And again, as I think about it now, growing up in Ohio, people used to use the term hillbilly in a nice way. And they didn't. They said, "I'm a hillbilly," and they meant that in a good way. It meant I'm real, I'm down to earth, I don't have pretensions, I'm not a snob, I'm a hillbilly. And that. So, where do you feel that Asheville fits in that spectrum?
Well, Asheville, like any town, and especially as this one turns more heavily with tourism taking off and things of that nature, I do
Dirty
think...
word, tourism. Right?
I'm not saying it's a dirty word. You're putting words in my mouth there. But I do think a little bit of the culture is changing, but that's going to happen in a town that's still kind of finding its own identity. But when I was younger, we used to come over to Asheville, and Asheville was a totally different place back then.
You grew up in Tennessee?
Yes, sir, just outside of Johnson City.
Okay.
And just to have seen its transformation over the past 20-some years from when I first started coming over here, it is stunning, actually. When I came back up for a visit before relocating back to the mountains, I was just like, wow, Asheville really has cleaned itself up a lot. And I still think there is a lot of what you would consider your old school hillbillies in the surrounding areas and stuff. But I think as far as socioeconomics go and just some of the prices and things like that, Asheville proper may not necessarily be the greatest microcosm of it.
Well, I guess what you're saying in terms I think that I tend to identify about Asheville these days is there's a concern that the character of Asheville is changing,
right,
to the extent that people who have identified with this area, grew up in this area, and have some of the cultural norms that you're talking about are being displaced.
Right, they're feeling pushed away.
Are feeling pushed away because cost of living is going up.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's a common refrain around here that the wages are not keeping pace with it. So people are moving further and further away.
Right.
And frankly, back into presumably rural areas where the job opportunities aren't so terrific, but the cost of living is less, but you still have to eat somehow. You still have to have a job.
Right, and that's why a lot of people, and not meaning to go too far down the road on this, a lot of people are moving out to Haywood and Henderson counties just for that very reason, but they still have to commute. Then it turns around and people start complaining about the interstate system and never-ending construction and all of that. Well, in a way, we're doing it to ourselves, but I'm not exactly sure where I was going to go with that without saying something that I shouldn't. So let's just say I do believe the culture and the identity is still out there, but I think it is being pushed out of Asheville proper.
Okay. So let me just ask you again, and I'm sensitive to time. What are there events, are there things in the offing that are going to happen around here that will cast a positive light on the cultural issues that you're talking about, people that identify or would be identified as, part of the Appalachian culture that you want to tell people about?
Well, of course. I mean, one of the first things I would suggest is going up and checking out the visitor center off of the Parkway. There's always different craft fairs, little music festivals, things of that nature going on in this town. There is a phenomenal art scene, especially with theater and the performing arts. So pick up a copy of your newspaper and go on Google, just look to see what's out there. In all honesty, you can find little bits of the culture tucked in to just about any nook and cranny in this area, but sometimes you just got to look at it with a slightly different eye.
So are there particular venues and festivals or events that speak directly to what you're talking about? Are you involved in any organizational effort on any of those?
Not currently, no, sir.
Is that something you'd like to get into?
I would certainly be open to the idea.
Okay. All right. So in just a few minutes that we have, there are probably some areas that I have not covered because this is new to me. But it seems to me like, in a way, the sorts of advocacy that you're talking about with respect to this particular culture, if I can call it culture, is really part of the dialogue that we're having across the country, which I think is good, about groups who are edge groups that are maybe not minorities in terms of numbers, but who are not part of the so-called mainstream. And I think that what you're doing is a positive contribution. But what else can you tell us in the couple of minutes we have left before I switch you off?
Certainly. Well, as I was talking about earlier, the podcasting, we do have a local Facebook group here called the Asheville Society of Podcasters, which I formed a few years ago. It's pretty much out there for anybody that's trying to get their voice out in the podcasting realm, to be able to connect with other locals doing the same thing, perhaps share equipment, share tips, share ideas, things of that nature, just to try to grow everybody's voice. Since being in podcasting, I've been fortunate enough to get involved with a couple of audio dramas, some voice acting, since I have a theatrical background.
What is voice acting?
Pretty much the exact same thing as acting, except you're doing everything through the inflection of your voice.
I see.
Have you ever seen the movie The Radioland Murders?
I have not.
Okay. Well, one of the ones that I'm involved with called Tangent City, we kind of take that approach to it. And there's another one, actually, Orchid Grove, which is the same thing. We kind of try to make them into movies, except you're just not using your eyes. All the sound effects, everything that you would need helps to build the story along with whatever the dialogue is.
Sort of like the old radio broadcast, the radio plays before television was part of everybody's home.
Exactly.
I see.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. First of all, I want to thank Blaine Kerr for being on the show. I've certainly learned a lot in the short time that we've spent together for this broadcast. I would encourage you, if you can wait outside the studio while I introduce my next guest. Okay. Do you have time?
Yeah, no problem whatsoever.
And we'll talk further. But again, Blaine, thank you very much for being on the show. And it's a pleasure, and good luck to you.
Thank you.
So I am going to set up for our next guest, but I want to mention that, again, you're listening to WPVM LP in Asheville, North Carolina, 103.7 on your dial and streaming globally at WPVMFM.org. Underwriter support for this show is made possible by Blaine's World, a blog that contains information about Asheville's theater scene, reviews, tidbits of information that you might find useful, and some of Blaine's jokes, most of which land and are not too risque. And if you'd like to be added to the mailing list, please send an email to blainebg@AOL, probably .com. I think I've got that correct. And this would probably be a place where Blaine, if he were here physically, as opposed to just in spirit, and I've got a couple of emails from him while I've been on the air, would tell you about theater presentations and theater things and things that are happening in this area. And I can't do that, so I'll refer you to Blaine's blog where you can get that information in vast amounts. The only thing I will tell you about the theater scene is that I and my wife just completed a murder mystery in Hendersonville at the Center of Arts and Inspiration, and there'll be further shows if you're interested in that sort of thing. I'm not steering anybody. I'm also going to announce that the sequel to Robin Hood is going to be performed at the end of June and through July at the Montfort Theater. I know that should be a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to perform in it, and the audience seemed to have a great time. So those are the only two theater things that I can speak positively about. The rest of that information you can get from Blaine's World. My next guests are right in front of me, and so let me turn to that portion of the script where I announce who they are. Who are you? No, I have, I'm going to try to do this right. I have Seraphina Syren.
Syren.
I knew I was going to do that wrong. And I have Gwen Sidious.
Howdy.
Did I do that right?
Yeah.
Okay, howdy. Okay, great. So you're here because you two are associated with a burlesque troupe called the Black Garter Review.
Yes.
All right, am I blushing yet? Okay, I'm not.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
You can, and let's try to keep it that way. And more information about that troupe is available on, and I'll do this, www.blackgarterreviewavl@gmail.com. Maybe you should spell it out because otherwise they won't be able to get that.
Well, that's our email, but
That's your email, okay.
yeah, you can contact us if you'd like to book a show or do anything of that nature by contacting that. But it's BLACKGARTERREVUE@gmail.com. And we're on Facebook and Instagram as well. You can find us just by looking up Black Garter Review.
Okay, so welcome. Thank you for coming. The word burlesque is in the name. That's a term which has had varying meanings, definitions, connotations, and denotations through the years. So I'm not going to impose any of my views about it. Tell us about what the Black Garter Review is about and how it's different or the same as burlesque going back in this country, I guess, to the beginning of the 20th century, if not before.
Certainly. It took its history, of course, in cabaret and of that nature. Burlesque now more means just the dancing part of it. You'll hear the word cabaret or variety act if you're going to see more than, if you're seeing aerialists and comedians and juggling, that sort of events as well into it.
That happens a lot too.
Yeah, belly dancing and those type of things.
So to be clear, because I don't want to steal your thunder here, burlesque, as I understood it, was part of what some people referred to as vaudeville, which was live stage performances before and after, but certainly before television, and they were sort of like a variety show.
Right.
There would be some stripping. Is that the correct word?
Partial nudity.
Partial, and maybe in certain venues
Yes.
not
Striptease, I guess.
Striptease, that's the word I was
That would be
searching
correct.
for. Striptease. There would be comedians. Sometimes there would be striptease and comedy at exactly the same time. There probably was juggling, and there were probably just variety of acts.
Correct.
So for a person as old as me, I would be thinking it's a combination of that vaudeville routine and the Ed Sullivan Show, except fortunately for everybody that watched, Ed Sullivan did not do either a partial or complete striptease. So
Wow.
Enough social commentary from me. Tell us about what you're about. What's Black Garter Review about? You say you're a troupe. I guess that means you go from venue to venue.
Correct. Yes, we're booked by different venues in the area. Troop means that there's multiple members, of course. We are a little bit different in the fact that we're co-produced rather than there usually being one person that controls the whole situation or having a production company and certain dancers underneath them.
So co-produce means more than one.
Yeah.
Yes.
More than.
Yeah,
Gwen.
so we both contribute for decision-making processes, speaking to venues, speaking to guest performers. We share the load with each other instead of having one person just kind of like take charge and I'm going to do all of the work. And that decreases everyone's stress.
Okay. So where in Asheville have you had these performances? You don't have a permanent theatrical home.
Not completely in the sense. We do have a monthly performance at the Sly Grog.
What's it called?
Sly Grog.
Okay.
And then, but we've performed Grey Eagle, Orange Peel, 27 Club.
Bywater.
Bywater. We've
I've been
a
all
lot
over
of-
the place.
a lot of different places.
And more to come.
Yeah, and we have some new places coming up.
And what about outside of Asheville?
We have a show coming up in Greenville. We're working on some different ones towards Johnson City as well. We have connections in different places like Charleston, and we're working on new shows. We just did start our troupe together, although we've been dancing together for a couple years now.
Yeah.
We just did start our troupe at the beginning of the year. So
So-
this is a building process still for us.
Oh, yeah.
So referring back to your earlier comment, what Black Garter does is the dance part.
Correct.
Not the juggling, not the
Those would be our
jokes.
guest performers.
Soon, though.
But do you find yourself being asked to appear along with performers who do other things as part of a? As
yeah.
part of, okay. So
Oh, yeah. We
We-
have Toy Box coming up. Like, he
Yes.
performs with us all the time, and he does.
who's he?
Toy Box is America's favorite witch.
Oh, it's a
Cartoon
person.
witch.
It's a person.
Cartoon witch.
It's a
Yes.
person. It's not
He's
a
a person.
venue.
He
No,
does
no.
puppetry.
He does puppetry, and it's super fun. It's
he
super
did what?
great. Puppetry.
Oh, puppetry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and
he-
so he works with us a little bit, and like you, Rachel 7, he does comedy a lot with us.
And us juggling and
Juggling
and
and-
belly dancing as well. We have
We
several
do have
belly
belly
dancers.
So your troupe does belly dancing.
No, we
Oh,
invite guests.
you invite.
performers.
Okay. all
Guest
right.
performers.
Okay. So for people who may know more about this and people who know less about this, what kind of training do you get to do what you guys do?
There are different classes that you can take in the area. Burlesque Academy is the big one that everybody knows in the area.
That's a local.
That's local
Yeah.
here in
Okay.
Asheville. Gwen took that one.
Yeah, so
Good
I
experience
went
in it.
to the Burlesque Academy of Asheville. It's run by Debonair, and she's got a 101 class, a 102 class. She's got a whole bunch of different classes. You can look them up on Google, and like that's really what pushed me to get into it. But like I have a background in dance, and I know that Seraphina also has a background in dance, which helps us a little bit. You know?
Yeah, I was kind of just jumped into the pool without the classes. I've
Head
danced.
first.
Yeah, I've danced for over 20 years and have a theater background, and just met some of the performers in the area and started kittening. That's an often common way to starting.
Kittening.
Kittening.
They
That's the
pick up
person who helps clean up before
Pick-
and after the act, set up
picks
props,
up- picks
and
up-
then picks up the clothes.
Picks up any
afterwards.
clothing that's
Yes.
been casually thrown.
Yes.
Okay. Kittening.
Yes.
Okay, I'm sure there's an interesting derivation for that word, but if you don't know it right off the bat, we'll just skip right over that. Okay, how many people do you identify as being part of your troupe?
We have 2 right now. With the third, we were 3 for a while, so we're working with 2 at the moment. We usually have guest performers up to about 5 different. So we'll have 3 to 4 different guest performers for each one that come in with us, which does make us unique in the area. Most troupes have their dancers
That are specific to the
specific to
troupe.
the troupe, and
Okay.
maybe one guest performer. We wanted to build a sense of community, and that's what kind of makes us unique in our area, and that we wanted to make sure that lots of different performers who might perform with a different troupe would have a different outlet also. So we work with other troupes as well, and people who might be independent.
Oh yeah.
So, are there other? I take it from what you're saying is that you're not the only one doing this,
No.
even in this area.
Oh no.
Asheville is a big hub for it, actually.
If you had to guess, how many different troupes or groups are there that perform in and around this area?
Minimum 4 troops and about, I'm wanting to say like 65 people in total. Because there's a
Wow.
lot of freelance people that do it that are not troop based, but they do guest performances with the troops or at like variety shows where they're just like, hey, this is what we're looking for. There's no specific theme. Would you be willing to do this? And there's a whole big community here of strong, confident people that just love what they do. I love it.
Okay, so I'm going to ask the provocative question, so to speak. I know that Asheville is a live and let live community. At least it likes to think of themselves like that. At the same time, there are probably a lot of people that live in and around Asheville that don't necessarily feel quite that open. But you know, it's a more or less open community. We
Correct.
recognize all genders. We recognize all sexual orientations. Obviously, races, religions, and so on and so forth go without saying. Nonetheless, there are probably people that frown upon what you're doing, or when they hear the word burlesque or hear the word. Do you use the word striptease to describe what you're?
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. That when they hear those words, they jump back, or they look down their nose, or they're against it, or and
Oh, yeah.
and I'm guessing that to some extent, places where you might want to perform or get into, you may encounter resistance, and not necessarily because the owner of that site has personal views, but where they're afraid of offending enough members of the community that they say thanks but no thanks. Tell our listeners.
Yeah.
But first, let me again say I am in the studio now with Seraphina Syren.
Yeah.
I said that right that time. And Gwen Sidious.
Howdy.
And am I allowed to say that those are your stage names?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I'm just not allowed to say what your real names are.
Oh, please don't.
So I won't. And you're listening to the new WPVM LP in Asheville, North Carolina, 103.7 on your dial, streaming globally at WPVMFM.org. So to speak to that issue where you still have to sort of convince, do a tap dance, so to speak, to get yourself accepted and to turn away those negative stereotypes.
Certainly. I think there's still the connotation, and again, as being women and empowerment, there is, we view, there isn't anything, of course, wrong with if you do care to strip. It is more the connotation of this as an art form. We put in a theatrical performance into it. It's women empowered. It's not male gaze centered. It's often comedic, theatrical. It's not just done for the sexuality aspect of it. There's very many people who put in their own political views and such into it. I know, I apologize.
Okay.
I'm trying not to block Gwen.
No, we're hearing you. Go ahead.
I actually there's a lot of backlash with people who are like, oh, this is technically sex work, quote unquote, because we do sometimes take off our clothes, not all the time. Not all burlesque performers do the stripping portion. A lot of us are doing it purely for the art and the theatricality and the fact that it makes us feel good about ourselves. And it's an amazing workout. It's an amazing workout.
While you're on that topic, there are obviously legal limitations.
Yes.
And
Every state has their own.
I'm assuming that those limitations exist whether or not there's alcohol served at the venue.
It actually has to do more with the state and the state's laws regarding public nudity.
So what is the rule here?
So
If you don't-
here
and
in
keep
Asheville, North
keep
Carolina,
it relatively
as short as I can.
No, just keep it generic.
Generic. Oh, generic. Nipples have to be covered.
Okay.
I think that's why he's not one.
Excellent. Go ahead. Okay.
Any private area has to be covered.
Okay. So
Yeah.
the usual quote
The important
erogenous
bits.
zones, so to
Yes.
speak. I'll speak in that term.
Yes.
Those have to be covered
Yes.
at all times.
all
And again, as you're saying, that has nothing to do with the alcohol issue. Because
No.
in some states, it's if you serve alcohol, you can do this, and if you don't, then you can do that.
Yeah,
but not,
those laws
not
go along with stripping. This is more performance-based.
performance. Okay, okay. Now, let me further on this line of discussion, if you're comfortable with it, or even if you're not comfortable with it.
Too late. I'm
We're in
already
it
here.
now.
So as you know, and I assume I don't know how political either or both of you are, but with our current president, there's the whole thing about hush money paid to, and people in the media were not comfortable, as well as the politicians, saying, is this an adult porn star? Is she a stripper? Is she whatever? So you had that whole business, and again, that's not obviously what you guys do at all. So I'm not trying to draw that parallel, but there's that whole issue, and I'm guessing that because of that whole issue being out there, it doesn't make it easier for folks that are doing what you're doing, which you're characterizing as dance, theatrical, legitimate for all the right reasons, not, and I'm going to use a term that I hope I can say correctly, sexual titillation, so to speak.
Yeah.
I'm guessing that whole business makes it more difficult, as well as the emphasis every day on claims of sexual harassment, things that people 20 years ago wouldn't have thought was sexual harassment. I'm not going to do politics on this show, but we have, apparently Vice President Biden smells people's hair. So it's hard, it would seem, to carve out space that's legitimate when there's that going on. Or do you not feel that at all?
No, I think you definitely see both sides, even fan-based. You see that side. Some people get it, and some people are step over the line. I think as burlesque goes, it's, again, I'm going to say the same word again, it's empowerment. It's taking it back. It's putting women in control of what they want to show and who they are, and owning their own bodies. It's taken away from that stereotype of what is socially acceptable to be seen, as far as even just body shape.
Oh, yeah.
And gender norms. We have a lot of, we have Burlesque and that sort of thing too as well.
With male participants
Yes.
is what you're saying.
Oh, yeah.
So women who identify themselves, and they don't say this as much anymore, as feminists from a political standpoint and empowered, how do you feel like certain resistance from them, as well as men who may be, quote, misbehaving, so to speak? But let's just talk about the women. Your claim that this is a form of empowerment. Do you find that there are women who say, no, it's not? In fact, you shouldn't be doing what you're doing because it's the
Sometimes.
opposite.
Yeah,
There
sometimes.
always is. Everybody has their opinion.
But you're
Yeah.
from your audience base.
Yeah.
Is it as many? Does it tend to be equally divided between men and women, or still predominantly men, or how does that work
No,
out?
I think we have
as
many women.
Yeah, we have a really good number of audience members who are there because they enjoy the theatric aspect of it. But every now and again, you will get the person who comes to a show thinking that they're going to see something like
Right.
Burlesque the movie, and that's not what we do, because that's not burlesque. And then they're seeing people who, like me, I'm a curvy performer, up there on the stage, and I potentially show partial nudity, and they don't like that because I'm a curvy person. But I get so many more curvy women come up to me after the show and just be like, "You're amazing. I could never do what you do." And I'm like, "But why? Why couldn't you?" Because I can do it. Is it less about you being able to feeling comfortable in your own skin to show that, or is it more about the stereotype that curvy women can't be naked? Oh my God, naked!
So you, again, to be in what you folks are involved in means you're potentially subject to a lot of different stereotypes.
Oh, yeah.
We had my last guest who didn't have anything to do with what you do, but it was sort of the same thing. I wouldn't have thought that there's this horrible stereotype for people that live in Appalachia, but I do know that in what you're doing, you've got people across the entire political spectrum who, not political spectrum, women who are okay with it, women who like the idea that you're not just having participants who have a classic, so to speak, female body. And I use that term advisedly because I can't think of another term.
I get what you mean. It's all good.
Right.
No offense taken.
So I mean, I guess what you're saying is, and tell me if I'm wrong here, what you're doing and what your viewpoints are about this is the human body is itself attractive.
Yeah.
And it's not just the female body, there's the male body part of it.
Yeah.
And it's not just one type of body.
It's
Correct.
all types.
So we went through the whole, in my lifetime, we went through the what was classically considered to be a beautiful female body, the Playboy image, the movie star image, the Jane Mansfield, the Marilyn Monroe, then the Twiggy, then incredibly thin,
Yeah.
borderline anorexic, whatever. And I don't know where we're at. Hopefully, we're coming out of that all together, and that's part of what you do. Or am I
Oh, yeah.
imposing
Oh, yeah.
my views on it?
I definitely feel like we're trying to take what we already have and like this foundation of women changing their bodies and building on it lately, especially in like today's society, the fact that everyone's beautiful. In their body shape, their body type doesn't mean that they're not beautiful. They're still attractive. They're still amazing people. And that's not just women, men too. Men are beautiful. Men are gorgeous. They have the same stuff that like a curvy male would have the same shape because he's human as a skinnier male. And just because they may have a little bit more chub on them, that doesn't make them any
Chub.
less sexy.
I just want to make sure.
Yeah, I got that chub.
No, I didn't say that. I'm just
I
understanding.
do, though.
Okay.
And I think also
Proud of it.
And also taking in that aspect of that's one part of the performance, but then
yeah.
there's the other side of the performance that we're doing this not only just so that you're visually seeing what you're seeing, but we're making commentary on life and social issues.
Oh, yeah.
And, sometimes it's for comedic relief, and we have some performers who are, like I said, doing completely political based.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot.
So it's not just for visual enjoyment
Okay.
as much as
It
is
sparks a
also-
conversation.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you another question. Do you all see? I'm becoming Southern. Do you all?
Y'all.
Do y'all teach? Do you do classes? And before you answer that, the predicate for that is, I know for a while you could find in the universities or different community schools or whatever stuff similar to what you're talking about, but mostly what I recall is like pole dancing. For a while, pole dancing was a big deal.
It still is.
I'm guessing there's no pole in what you
No.
do.
No, that's a different
That's a whole
performance
different
art.
type of performance
Might
art.
have it in a variety show, but
But there are burlesquers who do pole work as well, but it's still traditional burlesque style music, and specific things are covered, and it's more artistic. It's less about let's get these clothes off as quickly as possible. It's more about let's keep them on as
and the
quickly as possible.
acrobatics.
And the acrobatics, and it
Okay.
takes a lot of muscle.
And what I'm asking as well is, are you finding that when you do your performances, maybe after the performance, that men and women come up and say, God, I was really amazed by what you did, and I would like to be able to do that sort of thing. Where can I go? What opportunities would there be for me to be in this performance art that you folks are in the forefront of?
Yeah.
All the time.
Yes, and like I said, there are classes we particularly don't teach, but that's something we're hoping for future. As we get more familiar with it, mentorship is a big way to go, more so even. You find a burlesque dancer who's willing to mentor you and teach you, or a troupe that's willing to teach you. But of course, we do have, like as we spoke with earlier, there are classes here in Asheville so that you
So
can take.
where are you taking this? What do you see
So-
2, 3 years, even 5 years down the road for you all?
Traveling more, just building, growing.
Having more participants.
More participants,
More venues.
bigger shows. We're wanting to do something rather large. We're definitely wanting to do festivals more this year, and next year.
And just a lot of education, of course, of
Education,
it too,
yeah.
to take away that stigma.
What is on the immediate horizon? We just have a few minutes, but where are you going to be? What can people do to learn more about? Well, not just learn more about, but actually see what you're doing and
Sure.
get appreciation for it that way.
But we always post our events on our Facebook page and on our Instagram account. So if you go there, you can see everything that we have lined up, or at least what we've announced.
What we've announced, yeah.
But we do have several shows coming up in April. We have Slagrog, actually this Saturday.
Is that the name of the show or?
No, that's the venue.
The show is captivating cryptids and mesmerizing mythos.
So we're doing a whole theme based on cryptids and mythological creatures.
I'm so excited.
This is
Oh, nerd.
Gwen's baby.
This is my baby because I'm all about the nerdy stuff and doing nerdlesque, which is fandom based things
Right.
or anything that would be considered nerdy, book characters, TV
I hope
shows.
other people know what fandom based is because I don't know what that means.
Books and movies and TV shows. So we're doing cryptids, which are like Bigfoot, Mothman, Loch Ness Monster, that kind of stuff. And we're going to make them sexy, and it's going to be great.
The Loch Ness Monster will be sexy.
Yes.
It'll happen.
You'll have to come see.
It'll happen.
But then we also have a show later in the month at Grey Eagle, and then we actually have a show in Greenville this month.
Yeah.
And these shows, are they the same shows or do you
No,
change it?
we change
up?
themes.
Okay.
Yeah, every theme is different. And then sometimes we also perform with live bands.
You guys are making me feel so old. Have you ever heard of the movie Gone with the Wind?
Yes.
Or Casablanca?
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you know who Frank Sinatra
Oh,
is?
yeah.
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm somewhat comforted.
I'm the youngest one in this room right now, and I'm just like, yes,
I'm
yes.
not as young as you think, and that's another aspect that we didn't go into.
Oh, yeah.
We'll go into it briefly.
We have to briefly. Yes. It's also encompassing of all ages.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not. I'm on the fringe of millennial at best, and we do have several performers in the area that are over 50.
Oh, yeah.
So I guess you're saying you don't feel as if age is a necessary barrier.
Anyone
It's
can
not.
do it. If you have the drive and you have the want, anyone can do it.
Okay. Again, you said you're on Facebook. Can people find that easily? Or is it-
Facebook, Instagram, you just
Yep.
search up Black Garter Review. Review
And-
is REVUE.
Yes.
And we just pop up. You can also find us just ourselves. Seraphina Syren has her own Facebook and Instagram, and Gwen Sidious, me. I also have my own Facebook and Instagram, and you can follow us for all show information. We post everything, whether it's with Black Garter Review or potentially with someone else. We always
We do
post it.
collaborate too. So.
Yeah.
Well, again, I've learned a lot being a guest host on Blaine's World. I want to thank both of you. We'll try this one more time. Seraphina Syren, Gwen Sidious
Yes.
from Black Garter Review. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure having both of you on the show. I also want to thank my producer, Shelley Lieberman.
Just for today.
Focused, right, my producer, our producer, the
Yeah,
producer
yeah.
for today. So thank you very much, and next week hopefully you'll have Blaine back, who will be able to handle the show as with the usual aplomb. But I was happy to be subbing for him. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Take care.
Thank you.
Well,